Hello, friends and families. Welcome to the EDUCA DPS podcast, where we inform families and connect communities. My name is Javier Ibarra, your host of the English version of this podcast. Today in the studio, we have Cori Canty, School and Unified Improvement Planning Manager here at Denver Public Schools. Our topic will be a conversation about why our child's attendance to school every day matters. I strongly suggest you join the conversation through and listen through the end of this podcast, because our topic is one that is getting a lot of attention nationwide and in our DPS community. But first, let me introduce our special guest. Cori, how are you today?
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Cori, I want to ask you, for our audience, can you tell us, what is it that you do for the district, and what is maybe perhaps the most gratifying thing that you do for the district?
Sure. I get the privilege of supporting our 200 schools throughout Denver Public Schools with creating their improvement plans and working on how they can improve services overall for their students and families, as well as I help develop and implement the comprehensive district approach to attendance, have the privilege of supporting our schools around their attendance systems.
So you have a very easy job, is what you just said to me.
Super quick and easy to do. No, it's a lot and it's complex, and I absolutely love it.
That is the best part, when the folks that are doing the work here at DPS, and I often find this, they're so passionate. And I feel that that's the secret sauce to making things work, is when you're super passionate about the work that you're doing, the quality of it is just 10 times over. Cori, I want to start with our topic today and give our folks listening in a background about the topic. So DPS is working to address the number of students who are chronically absent from school through positive engagement and consistent communication with families, school staff, and the community. And the key word there was positive engagement. We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to positively show you all the outcomes that can happen and then give you the resources. So starting off, my first question for you, Cori, is why is school attendance critical for academic success?
Great question. There has been a lot of research done about the relationship between attendance and academic success and K-12 success and even college-going opportunities. We know that as early as kindergarten, attendance in kindergarten affects the student's ability to read on grade level by third grade. Attendance all the way through K-12 is one of the strongest predictors of whether or not a student will graduate from high school.
Wow.
Attendance is directly connected to K-12 success as early as first grade, second grade, third grade, and it's a cumulative effect, right? If a student starts falling behind in first grade, it becomes more and more difficult to catch up, to be able to take advantage of those opportunities that come up in middle school and high school and college and training opportunities.
Cori, what is chronic absenteeism? What is that? That's quite the term there.
Yep. We have two terms that we're talking about these days. Attendance has been the generic term that's kind of been used for the past many, many years. We talk about students' attendance. But chronic absenteeism has actually been around for a while as well. It's just becoming a pretty big focus, not just for Denver Public Schools, but also for the state of Colorado, and as part of one of the White House initiatives that was launched in May. Chronic absenteeism is when a student misses 10% or more of their time enrolled in the school for any reason. So they miss school because they're excused absence, they're sick, or legitimately they have a doctor's appointment, or an unexcused absence, or if they're suspended. If a student misses 10% or more of school for any reason, they are considered chronically absent. The reason why this is so important is because when the student is not there, they're not able to keep up with the learning opportunities that the teacher is providing for them. And it really doesn't matter if it's excused or unexcused. The bottom line is that they're not there and taking and being able to keep moving forward at the rate that's intended in order to achieve those standards and keep progressing as expected.
Cori, I want to ask you, give an example real quick. So let's say we're 90 days into the school year. And if my student misses 9 days, that's the 10% that we're talking about. But let's say, does that apply for the whole year, or how does that work?
Sure. So it depends on how far, exactly like you said, it depends on how far during the school year it is. So if it's 50 days into the school year and a student's already missed 2 weeks, 10 days, then that's more than that 10%.
Sure.
So it changes, the number of days changes as the school year goes along. It's 10% of school up to that point in time. The other thing is that DPS also calculates attendance by the minute. So if a student is, let's say they're 2 hours late every day to school, but they've never technically been fully absent, they've never technically missed a full day, we can still consider them chronically absent because they're missing 2 hours of instruction every morning.
Right.
They're missing a big chunk of the school day, and that's impacting their ability to be academically successful.
I just think of if I showed up to work 2 hours late, how money successful would I be?
Right.
So it equates, it adds up, and it tells our students that we should be coming to school on time because a lot of life lessons are learned at school.
Yep.
A lot of life lessons, including this one, right? If you set the example that you can be late every day for 2 hours to school, what type of employee down the line will you be?
Yep, you're setting up those habits. These are habits that we're trying to instill good habits in our students that they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. It's the same thing about being pulled out of school early. If a student's pulled out of school every Friday at 11 a.m. to beat the traffic up the mountains, that counts against that student's attendance too.
To go skiing.
Or to go wherever.
Yeah. Okay.
It's chronic absenteeism is missing school for any reason, excused or unexcused or suspended. If they're not, if the student's not at school, they're not being able to stay on track with their academic progress.
I think the important thing here to note is very rarely will a student actually say something against being pulled out of school early, because I think if I'm being honest, when I was a student and if students got pulled out of school, I would be so jealous because they got to leave the school day early. But that's why, as a trusted adult in the family, we need to be responsible for that and understand that. And that's the whole point of this show today, is to talk about this, and then the future work that you and your office team department will be doing along with all of DPS. And so it is great that you're here. But Cori, I have a serious question that I think all of our family members are going to want to know is, does an excused absence count towards the 10% of chronically absenteeism?
It sure does.
So you're telling me that my student, even though they're excused for the 15 days or whatever, they're still considered chronically absent under this term?
Yep. And chronic absenteeism, this is a definition that's not just for Denver Public Schools. It's the same definition for the state of Colorado and the federal definition. This is a national definition.
Okay.
It's 10%.
We're not making up terms.
We're not making this up. This isn't an arbitrary number. This is the same definition that's used nationally in education. It's missing 10% or more of the school year up until that point in time for any reason, excused or unexcused or suspended. We want our students in school. It directly impacts their own ability to progress, but because of the collaborative learning and the situations in the classroom, it also directly impacts their peers and their teachers when they're not there. So it's just, we want the students in school as much as possible. That 10% is important because we know that life happens. Kids get sick. We get sick. Things happen. There's a doctor's appointment that is really important that you get the child to that is only available at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and you have to pull them out. We know that life happens, but if it's to the point where it's more than 10%, they're missing more than 10% of school, then it's becoming problematic.
So let's dig a little deep into that, right? And this next question is going to be a very tough question.
Sure.
And I'll give you kind of a scenario, right? What if my student is going to miss or is missing more than 10%, but they're still achieving? They still have the good grades. And so the question that goes with that is, how does being chronically absent impact a student's long-term educational outcome, right? Me saying that my student is still performing, is still getting good grades is a short-term. What are the long-term outcomes of that?
Sure. So there's a couple of pieces to this. We know that missing 10% or more, even if a student is a high achieving student and is doing it, it's still bringing their achievement down compared to where they could have been if they were actually had better attendance and were not chronically absent. They could be doing more than what they are if better attendance. The other thing is that we build habits. As families and guardians and parents of kids, what we set up for them in their K-12 education are habits that they'll carry with them for the rest of their life. The example that you used, if you were to come in 2 hours late to work every day, it would affect your pay. If we are setting up an expectation that doing this thing, and even though we as parents might be saying, well, it's just school, you're doing fine as it is, kids' brains are not adult brains. They're living the habit. And that's a really hard habit to contradict after 15, 18 years of building up this habit, where this thing that I'm expected to do every day is not that big of a deal that I actually really need to do it every day. So then how do you then suddenly reverse that habit when it comes time to participate and attend college and get a full-time job and things like that when the brain is still developing?
The answer is you don't. You stop it before you actually let it become a habit, right? It's easier to create good habits than fix bad ones, I would say. But my question to follow-up question to you with that is, so then how does let's say the student is still high achieving and they're for the most part still achieving, and we know long-term it's going to have negative effects, but what does that do to the other students? What does that do to the classroom setting?
So it has a ripple effect. So if you think about a drop as the student is a drop of water, and the drop of water's there, it impacts, it ripples out, right? With the way that education is being done, the best practices in education there's a lot of collaborative work, there's a lot of group work. We probably, the great majority of us, remember when we had to do group work with 2 or 3 other people, and that one person was not there and not there again, and the rest of us had to pick up the slack. This is what it is on a day-to-day basis in our schools. It's group work, it's collaborative work. When a student does come back to class, if they're behind, then the teacher will usually have to pause or give that student makeup work or direct support to catch them up, rather than continuing on with the instruction for the rest of the class. It also directly impacts that student's social connections when they're not there. We know many of our students, and for me and probably for you it was true as well, school is a social experience. We go there, we make our friends, we see our friends. Sometimes we get in fights with our friends, but it's part of our learning and development on how we get along with other people. And so when a student is not there, they're not continuing their social development, and it's also impacting their other students that are used to seeing them and need them there for those academic group learning experiences.
It's like you said, everything has a ripple effect. I'm just trying to put myself back into high school, and for example, sports, I know if you had bad attendance, you couldn't start. You still on the team, but you couldn't start that week. Or, you know, if it all affects your grades. But I also think now as an adult, I can see the social and emotional learning, but I couldn't see that as a student, right? Because my brain wasn't fully developed. But it's true, right? You're adding to this environment of your school. And if you're not there consistently, right, you going there and coming back, you going there, coming back, I mean, it all adds to the learning environment, which we're responsible for as adults that work for Denver Public Schools. But also, we have a responsibility to those students, and it just becomes so much harder to catch them up, right? Because I'm sure a lot of parents have told you or have come up with, well, I'll just give them the makeup work. But as we know, the makeup work isn't the same as instruction. Right. And so if that was the case, then we would only do makeup work for public school system.
It's not possible to use makeup work as a replacement for instruction.
Right.
The instruction is specifically designed to get kids to master the standards that they need to be able to progress academically. Makeup work doesn't replicate that. It's a minimum expectation. There might be opportunities to show part of mastery of the standard, but many standards are not able to be done via makeup work packets.
Cori, moving along with the subject that we have here today, we've talked a lot about attendance, chronic absenteeism, but can we define how is attendance measured?
Sure. In Denver Public Schools, we measure attendance by the minute. So when a student shows up on time, they're present beginning at minute 0 of that day.
Sure.
If they show up 20 minutes late, then they're marked 20 minutes late.
Wow.
And they stay through the whole day. If they stay until the end of the school day, then they are fully present for that full day. If they it's during passing period and they're 5 to 10 minutes late to class every day, that counts as tardies, and it impacts their ability to learn. With attendance, with chronic absenteeism, which is our primary focus this year, we do look at how late students are arriving to school and whether or not they stay the full day or not, and all of that contributes to whether or not a student is considered chronically absent.
I have an interesting anecdote for you that just popped into my head about attendance. When I was around, I want to say 8 or 9, there was this young lady who was never absent. From K through senior year, kindergarten through senior year, she was never absent. And the school gifted her a car.
Oh my goodness.
Right? And so I thought that was amazing, right? And my mom saw that story. So thinking this along the same ways, my mom would never, ever let me miss school. That was so engraved into my early academic success, and it worked out.
Sure.
I think. I like to think that, right? But more than anything, it's progressed into the working world, if you will, my career, right? And I think that because it was so engraved, and I was able to also, I wouldn't say inspire other students, but be an example, right? They're like, oh, Javier's always here. And I used to always get the perfect attendance award, which I thought was really interesting. But as a child, that really boosted my self-confidence. It really gave me the mindset of, I can do it.
Sure.
Without me having to beat myself up and saying, well, I can't do it. Right? I never felt that I wasn't set up for success because I always went to school and I was never late. My mom was very strict with me as a child, but I just wanted to share that with you.
Sure.
But to note, we're not giving away cars.
I wish we could.
Right? And here's the thing is I never got my car. So
darn.
Yeah. And so we'll see how that progresses in life.
But you just underlined the whole thing, right? Those habits for success that then become second nature to you, and you don't have to go back and correct a bad habit. You've carried it forward with you to your adult life. And that's what we want our students to do. We want to set them up for success for their future lives. And setting those habits up from 3 and 4 years old in pre-kinder, knowing that it has a direct impact on their ability to read by 3rd grade, knowing that this directly gets them to be able to have as many opportunities as possible, including being able to start on those football teams or on the debate club. If you miss practices, you don't get to compete when you're in middle school and high school. It's the more that you attend and the more you keep up with things, the more opportunities you have for things outside of the classroom, even before you've graduated from high school.
Absolutely.
If you're not there and you miss the sign-ups for the school musical, you've missed the signups for the school musical because you weren't there.
And I think the message that we're trying to send here is that for sure you're going to miss class for one way or reason or another, right? Like you said, they might only have an appointment for your child's doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, right?
Right.
Or when I was in high school, I used to play soccer, and if we were playing a school district that was far away, we'd get to leave school early for an hour. So, and I just think, okay, so I know I was going to miss class, but the point of what we're saying here today is to reduce that number.
Right.
Is to reduce that number. And so, Cori, before we move on to the next question, I want to ask real quick about numbers. Mm-hmm. What is our number? Where do we stand here today as far as why are we addressing this? Because as I take it, that number is pretty outrageous for us to even have this whole show and talk about this.
Sure. Last year, the 2023-24 school year in Denver Public Schools, about 1/3 of our students were chronically absent.
1/3.
1/3. That's about 30,000 students.
Of our 90. Wow.
Were chronically absent during the 2023-24 school year. Remember, this includes excused or unexcused or suspended.
Right.
They weren't there,
right,
being able to take advantage of those learning opportunities. We're moving in the right direction. It went down from the previous year, but we're still way higher than before the pandemic.
So it's important to note for our families listening in, if we're trying to make sure that as a district, we are trying to close these achievement gaps, make sure that our students are reading at grade level, make sure that they are graduating, and making sure that they are genuinely set up to be great members of this community, of the Denver community, or the world, really, depends where you want to go. It starts with actually being there.
Right.
And this is the message, this is what we're saying.
College and career success depends on showing up every day.
I can only imagine if I miss one class in college, how far behind that would set me back.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about it gives me anxiety. Cori, are there times during the school year when students here at DPS are more likely to miss school?
Sure. What we've seen as patterns across the district is that November, December, beginning of January, when all of the holidays are happening, our number of students with chronic absenteeism usually goes up. Attendance usually dips.
Wow.
What seems to be happening is that people take extended vacations. They say, well, we have these 2 weeks off. We're going to tack on another 4 days to be able to make sure we have enough time with our family back east.
Sure.
Or there's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and so we're going to go to travel for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Right.
It definitely trends around that way. It's a tough decision. I empathize with, as a parent myself, I empathize with families that there's these tough decisions, and I can't, generally what I would recommend is that you need to look at your children's individual attendance patterns that school year, this fall, before you make any finalized plans to extend. If your child's been really sick, if they got hit with COVID, if they've had to miss an hour every other Thursday to go to the orthodontist, then this is probably not the year to add on an extra week of vacation.
Right, and those are, I know a lot of parents, a lot of families will, say, I don't like this Cori because she's saying this. But the truth of it is we're here for the academic success of our students.
Absolutely.
And if we don't share this awareness, right, and that's simply what it is saying, your student this year got braces, so they're in and out of the orthodontist. They were unfortunately contracted COVID early, so they spent some time there, and then now you're going to China for once in a lifetime opportunity in the winter, and then let's say, even adding more to this example, they're in 5th grade, right? A transition year into middle school. Where is that student going to be academically set up for success for middle school? And the answer is they're going to be falling behind. And so
Right.
a theme that I want folks to get from this podcast today, this show, is when you think about absent, think about falling behind. Those two phrases should be together. Every time that your student is absent, you should automatically assume that they're falling behind,
Yeah.
right? Because that is the case. The data supports that, right?
Yes.
Just to give you a quick example, and I hope my sister's not listening, but I'll give the example about me. When I was younger, as part of the Hispanic community, it was always common to go back home to Mexico during the winter break. But we weren't there for the 2 weeks that we're allowed in school. We were there for the month, right? So that we would see what's called the posadas. And as we were talking about this, I thought, why did we go in December? Why couldn't we go in the summer when I had 90 days or so?
Sure.
And I thought about it is, a lot of the Hispanic community at the time, and I know my dad worked in construction.
Sure.
And so here in Denver, that winter is particularly brutal. It's cold. You're not really building. It sets you back or whatnot. And so because you're not working, you take advantage of that.
Sure.
You take advantage of that time. And I thought, oh, how exciting. But it is true. I would always come back and I always felt very behind. And it did affect more than just the academics, I would
Yes.
say, right? And so I think that if we are looking to talk with our families, just be aware,
Yeah.
right? Be aware of how much time your student is not in the classroom, regardless of the reason.
Right. Not only do you fall behind academically for that, and our students fall behind academically, it also impacts that self-confidence and those social
Oh, yeah.
connections at the school. When you come back to school, even if you did the makeup work as best as you could without the direct instruction around it, and even if it felt pretty okay, you come back and you're jumping into instruction without the historic knowledge that the rest of the class has.
Right.
So you're trying to jump in and get caught up. There's a self-confidence issue.
You feel frustrated because you're not getting it as quickly as others.
You missed out on the whole pre-work conversation that happened 2 days ago and then yesterday, and now you're expected to jump in without having that background knowledge that's necessary to be able to do that work today. That's not able to be replicated in makeup work. So there's a self-confidence and a social piece of that
Right.
that is also affected beyond just the academic standards and proficiency.
I'm glad that you highlighted that because that's important for awareness of what we're doing here today. Cori, my next question for you is, what are some common barriers to regular school attendance and how can they be overcome? So up to this point in our conversation, we assume that it's mostly vacation, or I at least have assumed that it's vacation, it's doctor's notes, but I know that for some of our families, there are true barriers from keeping them from their students being here on time every day. So can you enlighten us on what those barriers are?
Sure. The couple commonalities that we've seen in terms of barriers is there is an issue around transportation. Transportation, particularly for our secondary students and sometimes for our elementary students as well,
Sure.
Can be really difficult, especially if students are expected to walk to school and they need to cross a busy street or even go under the highways. Or if the students are expected to ride RTD and it doesn't feel like it's a safe route. There are some tough transportation barriers for some schools and some students. Additionally, we've seen a big rise in mental health concerns, particularly amongst our pre-adolescent and adolescents.
Okay.
That is really becoming a barrier from them not even participating in school, but sometimes even from leaving their house, where the students are really struggling with their own depression and anxiety, and they're really struggling with social interactions at school or other places.
Right.
That mental health, and this is a national trend as well that we're definitely seeing in Denver Public Schools, is that there is a higher level of mental health concerns amongst teenagers after the pandemic. Probably the third commonality that we see is just misinformation or a lack of concrete information, that families don't really know how many days their students have missed of school, or they don't know about the communication with the school about the reasons. Research tells us that most families underestimate the number of days their kids have missed of school. So if you were to go and ask somebody on December 1st, how many days of school has your kid missed? Most families will say, oh, it's not that many, maybe 3 or 5, when in reality it could be 12.
Because they're counting excused, right? Because that's the change in perception, right?
Well, and if a family doesn't mark it precisely, then they're just going on their guts,
right,
as opposed to the concrete information.
Mm-hmm.
So we are really encouraging the use of the parent portal. These days, parents can check that very, very easily. They can go online or they can go on their phone and check portal, and it has exactly right there what the student's attendance rate is, what days they've been absent. They can also use that as a way to communicate to the school. And let's say all 3 kids have gotten COVID, because that's going around again.
Sure.
And so instead of calling each school one at a time,
mm-hmm,
you can get on portal and you can mark the reasons. You can say it's COVID. You can communicate through the school pretty easily, just one time on the portal, and give the reasons so that there is that communication with the school.
Well, Cori, you alluded to my next question, which is around sickness, around what happens if you do contract COVID. And so if a student is sick, what guidance do we have for families?
Sure, communication. Communication is the biggest thing. We do have updated guidance around how sick is too sick.
Yes.
That message was very much confused. During COVID, we had one message, and then coming out of the pandemic, there was still some confusion in the community, just in society in general.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, my child has a cough, I need to keep them home and quarantine them, or when do I send them to school now that the pandemic is mostly over?
Right.
We have gone back to the guidance that we had before the pandemic.
Okay.
If your child has, and we're working on getting that information communicated out to the community and directly with our families. If the fever is below a certain number, you can go ahead and send them to school. If they have a cough and no other symptoms, go ahead and send them to school.
Mm-hmm.
If they've been exposed to COVID, but they're not presenting any symptoms themselves, go ahead and send them to school.
Which is different, which is very different than the messaging that we were pushing out during the pandemic.
Correct.
But times have changed.
Yep.
And the more we know, the better we can act. And so I think it's important for our parents to know that we do have these sick updates. Let's reword that.
How sick is too sick?
How sick is too sick updates on our website, so that you can see as a parent or family member and make that decision for yourself, especially if you know that you have a 2-month vacation coming up to China, right? And so these are important decisions to make.
Sure. And when in doubt, communicate. Say, I'm not sure, they have this fever and a little cough. Let the school know and communicate, and jointly together as a partnership, we can make the decision that follows the guidance that's being put out from the state of Colorado.
Cori, my next question for you, and we've talked so much about the awareness, the numbers, how DPS, how the national scene looks like, but let's talk some strategic outcomes, some tangible things that our families can do to effectively address and reduce chronic absenteeism at home.
Sure. So the first thing that's really important is to make sure that you're monitoring your students' attendance. Are they arriving in class on time? Or when you drop them off at school, are they hanging out and showing up 20 minutes late?
Okay, good to know. Yeah.
Those kinds of things. Make sure you're actively monitoring and regularly monitoring your child's attendance at school. Other thing is building those habits. We've talked a lot about habits, but what can parents do to build those habits at home? Making sure that they're still youth, right? They're still kids. Even our 17-year-olds that are 6'2" still do not have fully developed adult brains yet, and they still need this family support. what can you do on a nightly and every morning basis to set that student up, to set your child up for success.
Right.
Make sure that bedtime is appropriate for the child and that they're getting enough sleep. Make sure they're waking up in time in the morning to get some sort of nutrition in them and get out to school so they're not rushed and running late, because that makes all of us a little crazy.
Right.
What can you do setting out clothes and backpacks the night before so that things are ready to go in the morning to make the morning easier? It's those day-to-day habits that, again, those day-to-day habits are setting your child up for success, not just in K-12 education, but those become lifelong habits.
Right.
To get them successful through college when we're not there,
right.
to hold their hand and make sure their alarms are being set, and they're expected to do it a lot of times independently,
yes.
except we're footing the bill.
Right.
And in career, so that they don't have those disciplinary actions for showing up late to work every day by 30 minutes.
I could see how having unhealthy habits, I wouldn't say unhealthy habits, but habits that don't set you up for success, do just that, right? I could see if you didn't set your clothes and didn't do your homework and didn't wake up on time, I could see how you would just say, all right, well, today's just a wash.
Yep.
We'll try again tomorrow. But if you have enough of those days that are considered just a wash, then now you are... They build up. And it's a great example of using that in college where... You're right. If no one's going to say anything if you miss class, right? For the most part, there are some classes that I know some labs that counted attendance because you're essentially paying for it. But when you get your grade back at the end of the semester, the number of times you showed up, because part of the homework is showing up. Part of the work for the class is showing up, right? That's part of what you're doing, is accepting the knowledge, and then you go out and practice it. And so your grade, if you're not happy with it, well, what were the habits that you did that led up to that, right? And so it's important to establish those now, and even more so when you get into the working world, so that you can get the job that you want, get promoted, learn the on-the-job skills. It's just a trickle effect, but it starts now. And a lot of folks are like, I equate it to someone who just graduated college thinking about retirement. I equate it to that. Yeah. Right? Because it is so far into the future. You don't even, it's not even in consideration, right? It's the same thing. Why is it important for my first grader to attend every single class? How is that going to help them in college, so many years down the line? What's the math there? 15 years down the line. But it all adds up. Yep. And it's a quicker span than retirement. Right.
And with college, it's even a bigger stakes. If their classes only meets twice a week, because it's a Tuesday, Thursday class, and you miss one, and you're like, oh, well, it's a wash, I'll try again tomorrow, that's half the class for that week. Right. So starting those habits young is really important. And we also know it has a direct impact on their school year this year as well, socially, emotionally, and academically. We know that attendance in kindergarten is directly correlated to being able to read at or above grade level by third grade. Sure. That research is very, very solid. Right. Students that miss more days in kindergarten and even preschool have lower reading levels in third grade. And that's the snowball effect. When you're already behind, when you're 8 years old in third grade, it's hard to catch up to be ready for sixth grade when we're already behind. Right. Because then you have to double down, triple down, and it's hard to do. Right.
I'll take this moment before our last question to plug in the READ Act, the Colorado READ Act, which says that all students should be reading at grade level by third grade. And the research shows that up until third grade, you're learning how to read, right? Past third grade, you are reading to learn. Yep. And so if you don't know how to read at grade level, how much can you really learn? Right. And it just snowballs. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Cori, my final question for you is, what support systems does the district have for students struggling with regular school attendance?
Sure. We have a variety of supports. It really depends on what the root cause is for the attendance problems for that individual student and family. The biggest thing that I would say is it's all about communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. We want to partner with families in order to support the family and the student. But if we don't know what the barrier is, we don't know what resources to plug in and what strategies to use to support. If we're not getting the communication from the families around the true root cause, and maybe it's embarrassment or whatever the issue is, but the more we can have that honest two-way communication, the more that the schools can plug in the resources that we have, or as a district team, we can go out and seek out additional resources to help support the families and the student with improving their attendance. We want the children to be successful. We want them at school. We want them to shoot for the moon. We want them not only to be at or above grade level, we want them to soar. And in order to get the students to soar as high as possible, we need them here as much as possible. And we need the partnership with the families to be able to account for those barriers, those things that are getting in the way.
Absolutely. I mean, our tagline here at DPS, our mission statement, is every learner thrives. And it's hard to thrive if you're not coming to school.
Absolutely. And we can't support and activate those resources for families if we don't know what resources are really needed.
Absolutely. Well, Cori, that's all the time that we have here today and all the questions that we have. I'm sure that we can do several segments of this and we will definitely have you back on the show to talk about the progress that we've made in reducing chronic absenteeism. But I want to point something out to our audience, is that not once in the show did we ask, Cori, what happens if a student is chronically absent? What are the consequences? How do we go and make sure we punish them? Not once did we talk about that on the show. And this is kind of the direction that we're leaning into, which is we are here to help. We're here to address the situation, and here are our resources, right? So this is an opportunity for us to start the conversation around being at school and being on time every single day. So Cori, I want to thank you for coming onto the show here today. Thank you so much. Well, friends and families, this concludes our EDUCA DPS podcast for today. I want to thank our guest, Cori Canty, for sharing this important information. I'd like to ask all of you listening in and watching on YouTube to please share this content and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Public Schools Plus, where you can find great EDUCA content and all of our multimedia productions. You can also find us on your major podcast platforms. Just search for the Denver Public Schools Podcast Network. Let's lead with gratitude. Our gratitude goes out to the entire communications department, which helps produce, record, script, you name it, and then push out into the world this show and many like it. So thank you to the entire communications department, and a big thank you to our proud superintendent of Denver Public Schools, Dr. Alex Marrero, for his continued support of the EDUCA DPS podcast and all of our multimedia productions. Don't forget to tune in into our EDUCA DPS podcast, where the learning journey continues. And please remember to tell your children more often, I believe in you and I know you can do it. My name is Javier Ibarra. Until next time.